Good morning, grovelers. I'm kind of semi-re-engaged with Golfworks. Kinda. Not really. Kinda. I get a little bit interested in participating, and then inevitably I start to suddenly remember what it's like. I get PTSD, and I have to basically run for the hills, take a break. But I'm momentarily back, kinda. At least semi-excited about talking about the golf swing. Kind of. So here's a little dose on my way to work. I got a few minutes. Let's talk a little bit about why it's hard to change your golf swing. I mean, it's particularly hard for you grovelers because you're somewhat special needs in this department, but it's hard for anybody. It's hard for tour pros, the tour guys I work with, good amateurs, like really good amateurs I work with, college players, etc. It's hard for them to change. It's hard for anyone to change because of the nature of motor patterns. Skill really, more skilled people, you could make the argument either way. Some people think, well, more skilled people have a better ability to do it. Maybe. That's not necessarily true. What you're going to find is that people that are higher skill have their motor patterns are more ingrained because they have a lot more repetition in their practice regime. So maybe it's harder. Maybe, because basically what's happening with the motor patterns is it's a neural, I don't know what the fancy words are, but it's kind of a neural pathway that electrochemicals are sparking something, and it's a pathway through the neurons and so on and so forth. But it's basically like you're cutting a path. You're in the Amazon jungle and you have a machete and you're trying to cut a new path where there's nothing but jungle. If the motor pattern you're trying to learn is significantly different, foreign to what you're used to doing, then essentially there's no pathway through the jungle and you have to cut the pathway. And it's really hard at the beginning because you're not really sure where you're trying to go. And you already have a pathway that's been cut away, and it's really tempting to veer toward that pathway, right? You've already, for whatever reason, it's not correct. The path is not correct. It's not an efficient pathway through the jungle, but it's more cut away and easier to walk through than the one you're trying to develop. And it's easy to veer back toward that. And the issue is that most golfers will try to go through the pattern something like this. They'll go on Instagram or YouTube or social media and they get a thought that's a little different than someone will give them a thought that's different than the way they're normally thinking about the golf swing or their movement pattern. And they'll go, that sounds interesting. Let me try that. And they may not be doing anything significantly different, but they'll try swinging while thinking about that thing consciously. And maybe they catch a few of them solid for whatever reason. And they go, I got it. This is new. Finally, someone told me the right thing. I'm on my way. But that inevitably they find out soon afterwards that even if it was the right thing, which it may very well have been, it's not necessarily gifting them a new motor pattern, right? So usually, if someone that knows what they're doing is watching you hit golf balls and they say, these are the 5 things you need to do, this is your game plan for improvement. When you do it, if it's a lot different than what you're used to doing, you'll go, wow, that does not feel good. That feels really awkward. Right. Because you're hacking away at the jungle and you can't really tell if you're making any progress. You don't feel like you're getting anywhere. And that translates to just poorly struck golf shots while doing something that feels really foreign to you, right? So you don't get the magic light bulb moment where it goes, oh yeah, okay, this is what I need to do. You're not going to get any of that, right? It shouldn't necessarily feel that way because it's not recognizable. Even when you catch one solid trying something really awkward, if it's the correct thing and you've been doing the incorrect thing, and you hit one solid, you go, wow, okay, I found the ball at impact pretty good, but that was still really hard to do. Well, of course it's hard to do. In thousands of seconds, you're trying to get your brain to follow a different pattern in the way it's instructing the muscles to do something at a very high speed, requiring very precise timing, with very penal results at impact if something doesn't line up correctly with your impact alignments. So everything about trying to develop a new motor pattern is trying to essentially keep you from doing it. Okay. Now, this is not new news to anybody. Everyone knows that to try to change their golf swing, it's really hard to do. People have more or less success with it depending on what the change is. I mean, I would define certain motor pattern changes as different levels: level 1, level 2, level 3, like level 1 being the most complicated, right at the DNA core of your motor pattern, and then stuff that's a little bit more on the periphery of what the motor pattern is. Like maybe you're just trying to veer the path, like you've chopped a path open through the Amazon that's pretty good, but it's not quite right, and you need to make the path veer a little bit, so you need to just chop away at the edges of it. Okay, that's going to be easier to do, right? Versus an entirely new direction. So, which brings us to the actual topic of this this guy in car video, golf guy in car video. The important thing is to understand understand the nature of the motor pattern, and not only why it's difficult to change. I mean, we know that, but what is do you have an accurate enough sense of the motor pattern to determine when you're working on different things, what are the easier things to do, what are the harder things to do, and when you're doing the harder things, to kind of stay with it, assuming you're working on the right thing, which there's no guarantee of that, especially grovelers who like set themselves loose in the wild of social media and come back an hour later with 5 new tips that contradict themselves, and they go out and try it. So the grovelers are at an even, like in a more challenging place, brought on entirely by themselves. So for the most part, it's their own fault, but that's just the nature of grovelers. There's nothing we can do about that. So what is, like, let's talk about the motor pattern specifically in terms of the golf swing and where the real difficulties are. Like, so if I have a motor pattern that's fairly functional, hitting a fairly neutral shot, and then you tell me, okay, no, start it out to the right and hit a big hook shot, I can use the way I move the pelvis and the difference between the pelvis and the shoulders to orientate the path, the radius of the golf club, the plane of direction, the plane of motion, and the radius. We're basically the same thing, but basically it's a hula hoop on a tilt. So that is your general plane of motion. I can change the way my pelvis, how much lateral shift it has, my tailbone, pelvis versus what I'm doing with my spine, and the differential between my shoulders and my hips, to point the path out to the right, and then spin the shaft earlier along the axis of the shaft, right? So rotate my forearms with a slightly different way. And I can do that without feeling like I'm making really a big motor pattern change, right? I can take the neutral system and I can kind of point the system in a different direction and then spin the head into a different club face orientation. And I can produce quite a different looking shot. And then I can do the same thing hitting a pull cut. Okay, those are not like level 1 motor pattern changes. Now, if I don't practice those very often, the chances of me pulling it off on the golf course without at least practicing those variations some amount, I'm not going to be as consistent as my stock shot, obviously. But it's not like reinventing the wheel by any means. Okay, it's almost like, here's my baseball throwing analogy, which some people like, some people don't like, but I think it's relevant. It's kind of like, you know how to throw a baseball, and then when you ground a ball, you decide as the ball's coming, wait, I need to try to, instead of throwing it to first base, we got a possible double play in the works, so I got to zip it over to second base. Okay, so you'd feel the ball, and then you'd step over to the left, right, and throw it to second base. So that's kind of a little bit like that, right? You're stepping in a different direction than normal. You're not pivoting your entire body to make the step the exact same. You're coming from having fielded the ground ball and you're stepping to the left, and what your legs and pelvis are doing are slightly different than if you would be, because you don't have much time, right? You can't reset and act like you're just rotating and pivoting and then start your throw. You just got to step to the left and throw, okay? So that's changing, at least in terms of the direction your feet are going on the ground. But the act of throwing the ball to second base, motor pattern-wise, is not different. The relationship between your shoulders and your arms is not that different. So basically, the motor pattern sits on your shoulders, right? It's really the connection of the pivot to your arm swing, the relationship between those two components. That, changing that relationship, right? That relationship, let me say it again for the growlers, that relationship between the arm swing, how it's swinging the club, and the pivot, the relationship those two things are playing with each other, the two main components of the swing, that's where your motor pattern, that's where the core of your motor pattern lives. And that is what's difficult. So what if I said, okay, you got to step like you're going to throw it to second base, but you have to get your arm to throw the ball toward first base, right? So then you're mixing things up. So that would feel really weird. That would be really awkward. And that would take a lot of practice to make that kind of contorted move, right? Well, that's what changing the golf swing is for most guys, even pretty good amateurs, even some pros, right? So there's the issue right there, right? It's the arm assembly, the arm and shaft assembly with the wrist alignments mixed in there, okay? And it's the relationship that arm swing plays with the pivot, right? So changing the nature of that relationship is the thing that's the real nutcracker. I mean, that's the hard part. And that's what takes the most time for obvious reasons. So even if you understand that though, like the general, if you look at a guy and you're like, okay, I need to help this guy out, he needs to change how the arm swing is relating to the pivot. Okay, fine. Well, you start working on that, right? You have the feet doing a certain thing, and then you're going to change what the arms are doing in relation to the pivot, and then you can't hit the ball, right? Because it's adding those two things together that give you what you're used to as far as club alignments and impact. So you literally whiff the thing, right? You can't do it. It's really hard. It's really awkward. You feel like an idiot. You can't put the club on the ball. Sure, you've changed that thing, the connection between the arm swing and the pivot. You've changed the nature of that relationship, and it's going to translate downstream to where the club is. So even if you were like, well, I just wanted to have him move his feet differently. Well, what you really want him to have to do is move his feet differently while changing the relationship between the arm swing and the pivot. And that's ultimately long-term what he's got to do. But if you just monkey around with things at the shoulders where the arms are, what the arms are doing, and the sequence of what the arms and wrist alignments are doing with the club in relation to the pivot, it's going to totally change suddenly how the club wants to interact with the golf ball. So what your brain does, and it tries to actively fight against you, it says, well, I still have to hit the golf ball well, right? Because when you trigger the movement to hit a golf ball, your brain says, well, we can do all this fun stuff, that's fine, but only the amount that allows me to still hit a decent golf shot, right? So there's a governor that's put in place there. Your brain's very sophisticated. It goes, I don't like this. I don't want to lay the sod over it. I want to hit it solid, right? So what happens is it tries to figure out how to get the club on the ball. And the easiest way for the brain to get the club on the ball is to just fight against you and say, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this thing doesn't change, especially how the arms are relating with the pivot, right? Now, the brain will make a compromise with you and say, hey, you can move your feet differently and move your legs differently, but now, and that's fine, but I'm going to keep the relationship the same between the arms and the pivot. And so if you're moving your pelvis, if you change the nature of the pelvis so that it would produce a shot that produced a more inside path, all things being equal, without changing the arm swing, then your ball's going to want to start 10, 15 degrees to the right. But your brain is like, okay, I'll let you do that, but I actually still want to start the ball straight. You see what the problem we're running into is? So you have to sit there and tell the brain, you have to negotiate with the brain. You have to go, look, you can kind of fight me a little bit on the relationship. That's fine. but you need to let me hit the ball to the right, which no golfers ever do. They want to keep hitting the ball straight. But if you could at least do that, if you could at least hit the ball to the right, the brain will go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I'll let you do something a little bit different, right? And you give me permission to hit the ball still pretty solid, but starting way to the right. All right, that's a compromise I can live with. And then you can start to make a little bit of a change. So in other words, you have to change the external cueing of the thing you're trying to decide to do with the golf ball in order for the brain to give you permission to do something different, right? And then you have to add the pieces back in later to try to get the ball to start where you want and the dynamics and impact, and et cetera. But otherwise, you're not going to change it at all, because your brain's going to go, if you lock everything down by putting parameters in there that say, like, I still want to hit a good golf shot, then your brain's going to go, well, fine, then I'm not going to change anything. Like, it's going to be the Mexican standoff, right? So anyway, that's not the best way to explain that. I can get a little deeper on that so that it makes a little bit more sense. I was just this is my first attempt at it to try to explain it, but that gives you an idea on how difficult this stuff's going to be. And there are better and worse ways to do it. If you understand where the motor pattern lives, and the motor pattern lives on your shoulders for the most part, the level 1 part of the motor pattern lives on your shoulders, then there's going to be certain techniques that you use mentally to work through that and start to, like, dig that path out of the Amazon in a more efficient way. And also, when you have an understanding of that, it keeps you essentially more committed to what you're doing. Like, the path doesn't look very good at the beginning because you chop away a few limbs and you're like, yeah, it doesn't look great. I still want to go to the path that's more beaten away, that seems clearer with less resistance. If you understand how it works consciously, and you create your strategy around that realization, then it allows you to keep working on the new motor pattern, even despite some of the initial bad results you're going to get, and you can make progress much faster. Like, it's going to take a long time no matter what, but at least it only takes X amount long time if you do it right. If you don't do it right, it's never going to happen, right? And that's really, ultimately, that's the theme of the grovelers, right? Is that they never get better. Arguably, they get worse most of the time. So anyway, that's some stuff on that. I'll try to do a more clear explanation of how that works with another guy in car video or whatever. But that's kind of the topic of the day. And because it's really not even, I mean, most people on social media are trying to tell you, they're trying to do research on this is how things are supposed to work. That's all fine and good. That's hard to figure out. But once you figure that out, ultimately, the real frontier of golf instruction is how to get people to actually do something different, right? The motor learning thing, that's the hard part. That's where things go pear-shaped pretty quickly. So anyway, there you go, grovelers. We will talk again soon. You'll have many questions because you probably only got about 10% of that, which is above average for a groveler. All right, boys, see ya.